My son's bride lifted her champagne glass, looked straight at me and said, "To the fat old hog we all have to tolerate tonight." Then she smiled. The microphone picked up every word. 200 guests, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet that had just gone silent, and I stood there, frozen with my son at her side. For a second, nobody reacted. Then someone at the back snorted. Another guest laughed. The sound spread like a small fire, catching on silk dresses and polished shoes, turning into a wave of giggles and murmurs. I heard someone whisper, "He does look like he wandered in from the wrong party." I didn't move. My hand tightened around my glass and I stared at the bubbles rising inside it like they belonged to another world. My boy Ethan glanced at Lily, then at me, then looked down at the floor. No protest. No, that's my father. Just silence. The kind that cuts deeper than any insult. The lights washed the room in warm gold, but all I felt was cold. My jacket seemed too tight, my collar too stiff, my body too big. And in all that noise, there was one sound that stopped everything for me, the sharp intake of breath from the man sitting next to Lily's mother, her father. His name is Richard Hale, the respected businessman, the man whose family everyone here tried to impress. I watched the color drain from his face. His hand mid-clap fell to the table. His eyes locked on me, not with amusement, but with recognition. That's Daniel Rowe," he muttered to his wife, just loud enough for the people near him to hear. "The primary lender, the majority stakeholder, the man who owns our headquarters and half of our distribution contracts." The laughter died so fast you could almost hear it snap shut. Someone lowered their glass. A fork slipped from a hand and clinked against a plate. Lily's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her perfectly powdered face. "Dad," she asked him, still holding the mic, "what's wrong?" Richard didn't answer her. He stood up slowly, eyes never leaving mine, and in that moment, everything in the room shifted. People who had been laughing at the fat old hog now stared at me like they had just realized they'd been jeering at the foundation under their own feet. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't even leave. I simply smiled, took a calm sip of my drink, and decided, right there under those golden lights, exactly how the rest of their lives were going to change. My name is Daniel Rowe. I'm 67 years old and I move slower than I used to, but my mind still walks circles around most boardrooms. I built my first business out of a rented garage and 3 second-hand desks. Now I sign contracts that decide whether other people's lights stay on. Somehow, in the middle of all that, I raised a son alone. Laura, my wife, has been gone for 18 years. Some mornings, without thinking, I still reach for her mug, the chipped white one with the blue rim. This morning, after the wedding, I opened the cupboard, touched the handle, and then stopped. I closed the door quietly. One mug was enough. The house felt different, quieter, but not the peaceful kind. The insult from last night replayed in my head over and over, but it wasn't the word hog that kept me awake. It was Ethan's silence. The way he stood closer to Lily than to me. The way he didn't flinch when the room laughed. I walked through the house like I was walking through a museum of my own sacrifices. The mark on the wall where Ethan threw a ball too hard and cracked the plaster. The dent on the banister from the time he slipped and I carried him to the hospital, whispering, "I've got you, kid, I've got you." The framed photo of him at 8 years old, missing his front teeth, hugging a soccer ball bigger than his head. We had been a team once, him and me. I worked nights, skipped vacations, sold Laura's car, refinanced the house, whatever it took. I wasn't born rich. I built my portfolio slowly, quietly, buying properties and shares that nobody paid attention to, including, years ago, a dying logistics company owned by a struggling family named Hale. Richard's father needed an investor. I became more than that. I became the man behind their recovery, the lender, the landlord, the silent partner who kept them afloat when the banks wouldn't touch them. I never asked for recognition, just fair contracts, mutual respect. So when Lily looked at me like I was an inconvenience, like I was clutter in her picture-perfect wedding, it did more than sting. It exposed something I hadn't wanted to see. Somewhere along the way, my son and the people around him had started believing the Whitmans' version of me, not the truth. I spent most of that day sitting at my desk, fingers resting on an old, dented lockbox that had lived in the bottom drawer for years. Inside were documents, shareholder agreements, loan schedules, signed personal guarantees. Proof of everything I had quietly shouldered so the Hale family could live the way they did. For a long time, I opened that box only to update a file, sign a renewal, keep things steady. That morning, for the first time, I opened it for another reason entirely. Not for them, for me. The box smelled faintly of metal and old paper when I lifted the lid. It's funny how even documents carry a scent when they've waited long enough. I pulled out the first folder, then another. The signatures stared back at me, Richard's, his father's, mine. Pages and pages of contracts that had been the Hale family's lifeline for over 20 years. Interest rates I'd lowered without being asked. Deadlines I'd extended quietly. Clauses I'd left unused out of kindness. Every compromise sat there in black and white, and suddenly I realized something sharp and simple. They hadn't just disrespected me. They had forgotten the ground they were standing on. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat at the dining table, spreading the papers out like a map of choices I had made. Laura's voice came back to me from some long ago evening when the business was just beginning. "Promise me," she'd said, "you'll never let money turn you cruel, but also promise me you won't let anyone treat you like you're nothing." I had kept the first half of that promise. It was time to honor the second. As I sorted through the folders, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Hey, Mr. Rowe, this is Janet. I used to work as Lily's planner. I'm sorry about last night. I thought you should know there were jokes about you in the rehearsal dinner group chat. They called you the sponsor and the big piggy bank. I still have the screenshots if you ever need them." I stared at the screen. That coldness in my chest deepened, but it also clarified. "Would you send them to me, please?" I replied. "Everything you have." A few minutes later, my phone lit up again. Images, screenshots, messages from Lily, her bridesmaids, even her mother. They mocked my suit, my weight, my age. They joked about enduring the old man to get to the assets. The worst one was from a contact labeled E. "Ethan, my son. Relax," he'd written. "He's used to being the odd one out. He'll act grateful no matter what." I saved every message, every image. I transferred them to a flash drive and slid it into a small velvet pouch. Next, I called my attorney. Not a loud man, not the aggressive type you see on television. Michael Lee has a quiet voice and eyes that pay attention to details everyone else misses. "Michael," I said when he picked up, "I'd like to review all standing agreements with the Hale family. Loans, property leases, stakeholder rights, everything." He paused. "Is there a problem, Daniel?" "There's about to be," I replied, calm and steady. "And I want to make sure when I move, I do it clean." By late afternoon, my dining table had turned into a command center. Contracts on the left, messages and screenshots on the right. At the center, a yellow notepad where I wrote 4 words. "Respect is not optional." Some people think revenge is chaos, emotional, messy, but what I felt wasn't chaos. It was order returning to a place where it had been missing for far too long. The Hale family headquarters is a glass and steel monument downtown, the kind of building that reflects the sky and hides everything underneath. 2 days after the wedding, I watched my reflection in those doors as I walked in, an older man in a dark suit, moving slower than the young executives around him, but with a steadier step. I'd called an emergency stakeholders meeting. Not just the board, stakeholders. When you choose your words carefully, people pay attention. In the elevator, I listened to the hum of conversation. "Do you know what this is about?" "No idea, but Richard looked like he hadn't slept." "Is this another restructuring?" In the boardroom, Richard sat at the head of the table, pale, tense, a coffee cup trembling slightly in his hand. Lily was there too, sitting beside him, her perfect posture more rigid than usual. Ethan stood near the back, hands in his pockets, pretending not to be uncomfortable. "Daniel," Richard began, forcing a smile, "we appreciate you coming in so quickly after the wedding. About that." "This isn't about the wedding," I said quietly, placing my leather folder on the table. That was just the moment I realized how far off course we've drifted. I opened the folder and laid out several documents. Loan agreements, property deeds, a controlling share certificate that somehow no one else at this table had ever read fully. "As of last fiscal year," I said, my voice calm and even, "I hold controlling interest in the company, the main distribution center, and the land beneath this building. I've never exercised those rights. Until now." A murmur moved through the room. Lily shifted in her chair, glancing at her father. Ethan looked like someone had just pulled a chair out from under him. "I'm proposing a restructuring," I continued. "One that ensures this company operates with integrity, not entitlement. Positions that exist solely because of a last name will be dissolved. Personal luxury expenses written off as business development will end. All loans extended below market conditions will be reviewed and brought into alignment." Richard tried to speak, but his voice caught. "Daniel, surely we can discuss." "We are discussing," I said gently. "This is what discussion looks like when you've ignored quiet warnings for too long." I paused and looked directly into the camera at the end of the room. We recorded all major meetings for legal purposes. I knew this footage would exist, and I wanted this next part on record. "If you're still listening to my story," I said, as if speaking to someone far beyond that boardroom, comment justice twice if you're still watching. The room had no idea what those words meant, but I did. I was marking the midpoint, the line between what I'd tolerated and what I would allow going forward. I slid a printed page across to Richard. It was an email from him 3 years ago, thanking me for extending their credit line when his own bank refused. I set another page beside it, a screenshot of Lily's message thread calling me our oversized retirement plan in a cheap suit. Richard's hands shook as he read. Lily's face drained of color. Ethan's eyes dropped to the floor. "This isn't punishment," I said softly. "It's correction, and it begins today." The meeting lasted 3 hours. Voices rose, then fell. Lawyers clarified, accountants shifted in their seats. When it ended, the structure of the Hale family's comfort had tilted, not toppled, but enough that everyone at that table understood life would not continue as before. We emerged from the boardroom into a hallway thick with unspoken questions. Richard walked beside me, slower than usual, his shoulders heavy. Daniel, he murmured, I'm sorry for my daughter, for myself, I should have stopped it. Yes, I replied not unkindly, you should have. I could have left it there. Business corrected, lines redrawn, but this wasn't just about contracts. It was about something more fragile, more personal. The boy I'd raised, the son who had watched me be humiliated and decided silence was the safest seat in the room. Ethan, I said, turning to him, come with me. We stepped into a smaller conference room. No cameras, just us. He leaned against the wall, pretending at nonchalance, but his hands kept fidgeting with his cufflink. Dad, this is a lot, he said. You're hurting their entire family over a joke that. A joke, I repeated. I reached into my folder and pulled out the printed screenshots Janet had sent me. I laid them out on the table one by one. Your fiancée, her friends, her mother, and you. His eyes skimmed the pages, then stopped, on his own words. He went quiet, truly quiet. Not defensive, not dismissive, just shaken. I didn't mean. You meant enough to type it, I interrupted, my voice soft. You meant enough not to delete it. You meant enough not to stand up when they said it to my face. He sank into a chair, elbows on his knees, hands covering his mouth. For the first time since the wedding, he looked like the little boy who once cried when he thought he'd disappointed me. I paid for your education, I said. For this wedding, for the house you're about to move into. I funded the company your new in-laws depend on, not because I wanted control, but because I believed in building something for you. And you let them treat me like an embarrassment you had to manage. A tear slid down his cheek. I'm sorry, he whispered. I believe you, I replied. But sorry doesn't fix patterns, only choices do. I handed him a sealed envelope. Inside is a copy of my updated will and trust. Your share of my estate is now conditional. He stared at the envelope like it might burn him. If you stay in a marriage where disrespect toward me is normal, if you raise children in a home where mocking the people who built your foundation is entertainment, you will not inherit the properties, the business interests, or the trust meant to secure your future. That money will go to scholarships, to families who know the value of gratitude. I won't fund my own erasure. His shoulders shook. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just nodded slowly, the reality settling like weight on his spine. I love you, I said, my voice breaking slightly for the first time. But I love myself enough now not to pay for my own humiliation. I left him there, holding that envelope like a mirror he couldn't put down. Justice, when it's real, doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like a slow, steady leveling. Over the next weeks, the consequences unfolded in quiet, practical ways. The first change, the company cars. Lily's younger brother lost access to the luxury vehicle he'd been using as a personal toy, registered under client outreach. The new policy was simple: company resources for company work, nothing else. He ranted. He called it unfair, but paperwork doesn't argue. The second change, the mansion. The Hale family home sat on land I owned through a holding company. Years ago, I'd lowered their lease rate out of respect for Richard's father. After the wedding, I had the lease rewritten, not to force them out, but to bring them in line with the real market value. No more special treatment, no more invisible cushion. When Richard saw the new terms, he came to my office, hat literally in hand, like men used to do. You're not evicting us, he said quietly, more statement than question. No, I answered. You'll keep your home as long as you honor the agreements, like anyone else. He nodded, eyes damp, and if we can't, then you'll move, I said simply, like anyone else. Word got around. Not the whole story, just enough. People started whispering less about the fat old hog and more about Mr. Rowe, the man cleaning house. Meanwhile, I met with Michael, my attorney, and signed documents to establish the Laura Rowe Foundation. A portion of my estate, larger now than Ethan's conditional share, would go to support single parents putting themselves through night school, people who knew what sacrifice tasted like. That night, alone in my kitchen, I lit a small candle by Laura's picture. We're still helping families, I told her, just different ones now. As for Ethan, he called. He came by. Sometimes he stood on the porch for 5 minutes before knocking, like he was rehearsing something he wasn't sure he had the right to say. We talked, slowly, carefully. He told me Lily was furious, that she'd called me vindictive, manipulative, every dramatic word she could reach for. She says you're punishing her for a joke, he murmured one evening, staring at his hands. I'm not punishing her, I replied. I'm teaching you, and I'm protecting myself. Over time, his updates changed. The wedding photos sat in a box, unframed. The perfect social media posts never appeared. The golden image of the power couple flickered under the weight of real life, budget meetings, reduced allowances, the sudden realization that their lifestyle had always rested on the respect of the very man they had mocked. I didn't gloat, I didn't point at their discomfort and call it satisfaction. I simply watched, from the distance I had chosen, as truth did what it always does when you stop hiding it. It rearranged everything. This morning, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sun creep over the tops of the houses. The neighborhood looked the same, lawns trimmed, cars parked, a dog barking at a squirrel that had no intention of moving. But something inside me had shifted for good. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a room I had finally cleared of furniture that didn't belong. Ethan and I were still finding our way. He visits more now alone, no Lily. Sometimes he talks about counseling. Sometimes he just sits with me, both of us watching the street as if the answers might walk by. He doesn't ask me to undo the conditions in my will. He knows better now. He knows they aren't about control, they're about respect. As for the Hales, they're still in their home for now. Richard works harder than I've ever seen him work. His son got a real job, not a title with a parking spot. Lily took a position at a smaller firm where nobody knows her as the woman who mocked the man signing the checks, where she is simply the new associate who has to prove herself like everyone else. Some nights I think about that moment at the wedding, the laughter, the spotlight, the word hog echoing through the room. For a while, that memory felt like a wound I couldn't stop touching. Now it feels like a turning point. The place where I finally chose myself. People say age softens a man. Maybe it does, but it also strips away illusions. It teaches you the difference between being kind and being a doormat, between sacrificing and disappearing. I didn't destroy their lives. I didn't scream or threaten or set out to ruin anyone. I simply brought reality back into the room and let everyone feel its weight. Justice, I've learned, isn't about making someone else suffer the way you did. It's about restoring balance. About making sure the next time someone lifts a glass in a golden room and looks your way, they understand exactly who they're speaking to. If you've listened this far, wherever you are, I want you to remember something. You are not obligated to fund your own disrespect. Not with your money, not with your time, not with your silence. My son's bride called me a fat old hog at their wedding. Her father learned I was the man holding up everything they took for granted. I didn't shout. I didn't break. I just stepped back into the place I'd quietly earned and stopped apologizing for standing there. Now the mornings are lighter. The coffee tastes warmer. And when I set one mug on the table instead of two, it doesn't hurt the way it used to. It just reminds me of the people I've loved, the things I've built, and the truth I finally chose. In the end, the most peaceful kind of revenge is living with your dignity intact. If you were in my shoes, would you have done the same?